There's a phrase that gets repeated in retirement planning seminars, in financial advice columns, in government brochures. The golden years. Decades of freedom stretching from retirement to the end of life, filled with travel, hobbies, time with grandchildren. It's a symbol of reward, of security, of what a lifetime of work should earn you. But symbols have a dangerous quality. They let us believe things are stable when the ground beneath them is already cracking. This week, we need to talk about what's happening with American retirement. Not the sanitized version you'll hear from financial institutions, not the talking points designed to keep you contributing to your 401k, the reality. Because what's unfolding right now is not just a savings gap, it's the quiet collapse of a retirement system that generations took for granted. And the rupture is already showing up in places Washington isn't even looking. Let me start with something concrete, something you can measure. Retirement account balances. In the past decade, Americans have been accumulating debt and cutting back on savings at a scale that financial planners have never seen. Workers approaching retirement age are reporting account balances they haven't experienced outside of a major market crash. Households in their 50s are watching their retirement projections collapse. This isn't an accident. This isn't just bad planning or some random economic trend. This is behavioral economics playing out in real time. And it's a signal that should terrify anyone paying attention. Because retirement savings is a trust-based system. You don't save for 40 years unless you trust the system will be there. You don't sacrifice today's spending for tomorrow's security unless you believe that security is real. And when trust evaporates, savings stops. Here are the numbers. 46% of American households have zero retirement savings. Zero. Not a small amount. Not something they're embarrassed about. Nothing. And for those who do have savings, the median 401k balance for workers in their 50s is $95,642. People who are 10, maybe 15 years from retirement. Financial experts suggest you should have around $500,000 saved by age 50. The gap isn't small, it's catastrophic, and it's getting wider every year. Now, financial advisors will tell you that compound interest is your friend. They'll say, start early, save consistently, and you'll be fine. It's a compelling story. It's simple. It's emotionally satisfying. It's also economically insufficient for most Americans. Here's how the retirement system actually works. You, the worker, pay into your retirement account. Not your employer in most cases, not the government. You set aside money from your paycheck. And then, because companies don't provide pensions out of charity anymore, they expect you to manage your own investments, predict your own healthcare costs, and not outlive your money. So when you hear, take control of your retirement, what you should hear is, we've transferred all the risk from corporations and government to you, and if you fail, that's your problem. But it gets worse. Because the United States doesn't have separate retirement pillars that happen to work together, it has an integrated system that was built over decades. Let me give you an example. A typical middle-class retirement depends on three sources of income. Social Security provides the foundation. Personal savings, usually a 401k or IRA, adds the second layer. And maybe a part-time job or pension provides the third. Three sources, multiple dependencies. That's not diversification. That's a system of interconnected vulnerabilities. And when you disrupt that system, when Social Security trust funds face depletion, when savings rates plummet, when pensions disappear, you don't just create gaps, you destroy the entire structure. The retiree who was counting on Social Security loses purchasing power. The worker who needed employer matching loses accumulation capacity. The family on both sides loses their financial security. This is what happens when you apply individual responsibility thinking to a systemic problem. Complex systems don't bend, they break. And once they break, they don't go back together easily. Now, there's an argument you'll hear from retirement industry advocates. They'll say, yes, there will be short-term pain, but long-term people will adjust. They'll work longer, they'll save more. It's a nice theory. It's also wrong. Because the people who benefit from the current system are not the workers. They're small, concentrated financial services firms who have the economic power to keep extracting fees from retirement accounts. Maybe it's a mutual fund company charging 1% annually. Maybe it's an insurance company selling expensive annuities. They get the benefit. But the cost is diffused across millions of savers who each lose a little bit more to fees, to poor returns, to inflation. And because the pain is spread so thin, because it's just a few $1,000s less at retirement, a slightly smaller monthly check, nobody organizes, nobody resists. This is classic wealth extraction. A small group wins big, everyone else loses small, and the politicians get to pretend the system is working. But let's get back to the ground level. Because while the economists are debating policy, real people in real communities are already paying the price. Phoenix, Arizona, Tampa, Florida, Las Vegas, Nevada. These are retirement destinations. Their economies depend on retirees with disposable income. Retirees who buy homes, eat at restaurants, support local businesses, pay property taxes. And those people aren't coming anymore with the same resources. More than half of workers, 59%, now plan to work in retirement. Not because they want to, because they have to. Fewer retirees with spending money means reduced revenue at local businesses. Reduced revenue means hiring freezes, maybe layoffs. Layoffs mean less tax revenue for municipalities. Less tax revenue means cuts to services that retirees depend on. This is the transmission path, and it moves faster than national retirement statistics can capture. By the time the data shows up in a government report 6 months from now, the damage will already be done. The small businesses will have closed. The property values will have declined. The community services will have been cut. And patterns, once changed, rarely revert. Now, there's a fantasy that gets repeated in financial planning circles. If Americans can't save enough, they'll just work longer. They'll delay retirement. We'll adjust expectations. It's wishful thinking that ignores basic physical reality. Working longer sounds reasonable when you're healthy at 45. It sounds different when you're 68 with arthritis, high blood pressure, and chronic fatigue. You cannot replace a functioning retirement system with just work until you die. The bodies don't work. The jobs aren't there for older workers. The healthcare costs accelerate. But by the time policymakers figure this out, the damage will be permanent. Let me talk about something that doesn't show up in retirement statistics, but matters more than almost anything else. Confidence. Financial systems don't just run on compound interest and contribution rates, they run on trust. Trust makes people save for decades. Trust allows long-term planning. Trust is what makes workers forego current consumption, contribute to accounts, and believe the money will be there when they need it. And trust is being destroyed. The Social Security Trust Fund is projected to be depleted by 2033, leading to potential benefit cuts of 23%. When retirement account balances get decimated by market crashes, when companies eliminate pensions without warning, when healthcare costs in retirement are estimated at over $172,000 per person, what signal does that send? It tells workers, don't count on Social Security being there at current levels. It tells savers, your 401k might not be enough, no matter how much you put in. It tells families, you're on your own. The safety net has holes, and once that signal is sent, once trust is broken, rebuilding it takes decades. Trust loss is asymmetric. It disappears quickly. It returns slowly, if at all. This brings us to the behavioral shift that's already happening among American workers. Quietly, without headlines, without policy announcements, people are giving up on traditional retirement. They're accepting that they'll work until they can't anymore. They're assuming their children will have to help them. They're planning for a retirement that looks nothing like what they were promised. This is economic capitulation, and it's rational. Why would you sacrifice your current quality of life for a future that seems increasingly impossible to reach? Why would you save 15% of your income when rent is taking 40% and healthcare another 15%? Workers are reducing their expectations of a secure retirement, and in doing so, America is losing something fundamental. The promise that hard work leads to security, that you can retire with dignity, that the system rewards those who play by the rules. That promise is evaporating, and it's not coming back. Now, let's be clear about what's actually happening here. This isn't about personal finance, not really. This is political theater. Retirement policy as performance art for voters who want simple answers. The tough rhetoric about personal responsibility. The simple solutions like just save more. The you versus the system framing. It's designed to avoid the hard conversations. Why are wages stagnant while productivity keeps rising? Why do healthcare costs increase 3 times faster than inflation? Why did we shift retirement risk from employers to employees without ensuring workers could actually handle that risk? Those are complicated questions with uncomfortable answers. They require talking about corporate power, about wealth inequality, about the financialization of retirement savings, about political capture by industries that profit from the current system. So instead, politicians offer personal responsibility. Blame the workers who didn't save enough. Blame the people who made poor investment choices. Blame individuals for a systemic failure. It's easier, it's emotionally satisfying, and it doesn't require fixing anything. But here's the problem. The retirement crisis doesn't improve. The structural problems don't get solved, and the people who are actually struggling, they stay struggling while being told it's their own fault. What we're witnessing is a crisis of American governance. Not in the dramatic sense, not riots in the streets, in the quiet sense. The erosion of systems that previous generations built. Policy is being made without long-term thinking, without regard for consequences, without acknowledgement of how integrated and fragile these systems are. Short-term political considerations trump long-term national welfare, and the result? Workers stop saving, retirees struggle, the social contract that held for generations begins to fracture, and the country that promised security to those who worked hard is failing to deliver on that promise, piece by piece, without even seeming to notice what it's losing. This matters beyond individual retirees. When millions of Americans reach retirement age without adequate savings, the consequences ripple through the entire economy. Consumer spending drops. Retirees living on limited fixed incomes don't buy new cars, don't renovate homes, don't travel, don't spend on discretionary items. That's demand destruction across multiple sectors. Adult children have to support aging parents. Money that should be going to their own retirement savings, to their children's education, to building their own wealth, gets redirected to keeping mom and dad afloat. That's generational wealth transfer in reverse. Government safety net programs face unprecedented strain. Medicaid, food assistance, housing subsidies. When Social Security isn't enough and personal savings are exhausted, people turn to these programs. State and federal budgets buckle under the weight. Healthcare systems get overwhelmed. People delay necessary care because they can't afford it. They show up in emergency rooms with conditions that should have been treated years earlier. Costs explode, outcomes worsen, and the entire system becomes less efficient. This is how economic vulnerability cascades, not in one dramatic moment, in thousands of small failures. A retired teacher who has to choose between medication and groceries. A former factory worker living in his daughter's basement because he can't afford rent. A 69-year-old Walmart greeter working 40 hours a week because Social Security doesn't cover his bills. When your retirement system fails tens of millions of people, when the promise of security after a lifetime of work becomes a cruel joke, the world notices. Younger generations notice. They look at their parents, their grandparents, and they think, "Why am I working myself to death for this?" International observers notice. They see a wealthy nation unable or unwilling to provide for its elderly, and they question American competence. This is how economic leadership erodes. Not in one dramatic policy failure, in 1,000 small betrayals of the social contract that made America prosperous. Let me tell you something about retirement systems that politicians hate to admit. There's a point of no easy return. Demographics are destiny. The baby boomers are already retiring. From 2024 to 2027, more than 4.1 million Americans are turning 65 each year. The largest wave of retirements in American history. And they're not ready. The median household approaching retirement has less than $100,000 saved. That might last 5 years if they're frugal, maybe 10 if they're incredibly careful and lucky. Then what? You can't go back in time and save more. You can't retroactively build the wealth you should have accumulated over 4 decades. The compounding is already done. The opportunities are already past. A worker who is 62 years old today needed to start saving aggressively at age 25 to be ready. But at 25, in 1988, they were probably making less than $30,000 a year. They were dealing with childcare costs, or student loans, or a recession, or all of the above. They did what they could, and it wasn't enough. Not because they failed, because the system was inadequate. And now, at 62, there's no catch-up mechanism. There's no way to suddenly accumulate $400,000 in 3 years. The math doesn't work. The time is gone. This is the economic law that political rhetoric cannot override. Time is finite. Compounding requires decades, and once those decades have passed, you cannot get them back. So where does this leave us? Millions of Americans are heading toward retirement unprepared. Social Security faces funding shortfalls within a decade. Healthcare costs continue to rise faster than inflation, and the political system seems incapable of addressing any of it meaningfully. The tragedy is that none of this had to happen. This wasn't an external shock. This wasn't a natural disaster. This was a choice. A series of choices made over decades. The choice to shift from defined benefit pensions to defined contribution plans without ensuring workers could manage that responsibility. The choice to allow wage stagnation while costs for housing, healthcare, and education exploded. The choice to financialize retirement savings, creating an entire industry that extracts fees from workers' accounts. The choice to underfund Social Security's future obligations while knowing full well the demographic wave was coming. The choice to make healthcare in America the most expensive in the world without delivering better outcomes. The choice to treat retirement security as a personal responsibility rather than a shared social commitment. And the cost of those choices is being paid right now. Not by the politicians who made them, not by the executives who eliminated pensions to boost quarterly earnings, not by the financial services industry that profits from managing retirement accounts, by the 67-year-old who just retired and realized her savings won't last 5 years, by the 72-year-old working part-time at Home Depot because Social Security doesn't cover his rent, by the 58-year-old who knows she's behind but has no idea how to catch up, by the 35-year-old who looks at his parents' situation and feels hopeless about his own future. They're the ones living with the consequences while Washington moves on to the next news cycle, while corporations post record profits, while the financial industry collects its fees. The question now is whether this crisis can be fixed, whether the trust can be rebuilt, whether the retirement system that took generations to build can be repaired before it completely collapses. I don't have an optimistic answer, because the forces driving this aren't just economic, they're political. And politics right now rewards short-term thinking over long-term solutions. It rewards sound bites over structural reform. It rewards protecting concentrated interests over helping diffuse populations. Until that changes, until there's a political cost for allowing this crisis to deepen, until voters demand actual solutions rather than accepting blame for a systemic failure, the incentive structure remains broken. And so the American retirement dream keeps dying. Quietly. Invisibly. One depleted savings account at a time. One delayed retirement at a time. One 70-year-old still working at a time. The golden years have become the working years. The promise of security has become the reality of struggle. And tens of millions of Americans who did everything they were told to do, who worked hard, who saved what they could, who played by the rules, are discovering that the rules were rigged against them from the start. This isn't a personal failure. This is a systemic betrayal. And until we start treating it as such, until we stop blaming individuals for structural problems, until we demand that our economic and political systems actually deliver on the promises they make, nothing will change. The time bomb is ticking. For millions of Americans, it has already gone off, and nobody in power seems to care enough to stop it.